So I picked up a bootleg Elgato off of Amazon for 80 bucks, and I'm genuinely curious on how it performs. There's countless other capture cards for like 15, 16 bucks, and those work actually surprisingly well. The main issue with them is hardware. The hardware tends to fail quite frequently, just depending on which one you get from which batch. But I am curious, as this is significantly more expensive than those, and how it compares to the Elgato capture card, which in this case is the HD60S Plus. So let's just look at the box. Straight up front, we can see that it supports 1080p at 60 FPS. It's a USB 3.0. I don't know why it says USB 30, unless that's just a thing that I guess I've never heard of. And if we look on the side, it says it supports OBS and QuickTime Player, and it works for Windows and Mac, which is nice. Of course, the social networks such as YouTube, Twitch, Facebook. I don't know who the f live streams to Facebook. And on the back, it just tells all the requirements. It's pretty similar. They both require a minimum of 4 gigabytes of RAM. Yeah, an i5 CPU or better. And on the back of the box, it shows that it supports Xbox One, Blu-ray, PS4, and Nintendo Switch. But on the Amazon webpage, it says that it supports PS5, PS4, Xbox One, 360, Switch, and more. So I will be testing this on my Mac, my MacBook Pro, and hooking up my PS5 and then my Switch to overall test and compare between this and the Elgato and see how they perform. So let's unbox this puppy. As you can see, made in China. It says that it supports 4K. It should do 4K 30, and we'll just sort of see how it goes. All right, GAM Live. HD60 game video capture. So on one side we have the line in, which I assume is for audio, USB 3.0, and then input and output for the HDMIs. Okay. And here we have a USB-C to USB 3.0, I think. Of course, the HDMI, and then just a USB to USB, and the manual. Yep, that smells like China. So just basic instructions. So we would use OBS or QuickTime Player, which is fine. So yeah, just some general instructions. Yeah, one is the USB 3.0 port, but the box claims it's USB 30. LED, so it should light up right here. HDMI input, HDMI output, line in. If you could stream or record party chat and gameplay audio, but you need a chat link adapter. It's okay, I don't have friends to need chat. So compared to the Elgato, I mean, it's very similar. It's, I guess, not exactly the same, but I haven't seen any mainstream capture cards look like this. So I want to say that. As you can see, the Elgato overall just has more ports. This is actually nicer though, having them all on one side. That is super convenient. You just have cables going this way, and then as opposed to having like a thick HDMI going here and then this, that's usually rather annoying. Shape and size, they're pretty similar, I would say. So the Elgato that we would be comparing this to would be the HD60. I have the S Plus, which supports 4K. The HD60 supports 1080p 60 FPS, so it's more of in this ballpark. But if you just look at the box, it's super similar to the HD60. The prints at the bottom, sort of stuff on the side, and it's rather obvious of what they're trying to impersonate. All right, so overall, this is the comparison of it, and I think now it's just time to put these to the test and see how they perform. We're going to be using Mac OS, and I haven't had any issues recording on this, and we'll see how this performs and if it's worth paying 80 bucks for this as opposed to 220 for this, or 160 without tax for the HD60S. So setting it up is pretty easy. You use the USB to USB-C or the double-ended USB to plug it into your PC or MacBook. And then you plug in the HDMI from your console into the input section, and the HDMI from your monitor or TV goes into the output, and you're good to go. So to start off the comparison, both capture cards were recorded through OBS at a resolution of 1920 by 1080, 60 FPS, and a bitrate of 30 megabits per second. Just a disclaimer for Mac users, Elgato does not provide Mac drivers for the HD60 or HD60S to work with OBS. They instead expect you to use their Dookie game capture app, but for the sake of comparison, both the GAM Live and the HD60S Plus both work perfectly fine with OBS, so that's what we'll be using further on. So I ended up spending about a week testing and comparing gameplay, first off with more stationary games like Ratchet & Clank, Elden Ring, and Metroid Dread on my Switch. They honestly looked 99% the same. I would say that there is a tad more contrast in the Elgato and a minuscule amount more sharpness than the GAM, but that could be that I've just spent so long staring and comparing them that at this point I'm just second guessing myself. To quote the infamous Alex Jones,
I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm kind of retarded.
But as for the recording experience, I had little to almost no latency the whole time, and surprisingly, there were a lot more moments where I felt like the Elgato was a bit behind. And moving on from these stationary games, I wanted to play and test out something more FPS refresh heavy, so I popped in Deathloop on the visual quality, which is dynamic 4K scaling and 60 FPS, and the GAM held up with the Elgato. I noticed that it was constant 60 FPS, there weren't any drop. The motion blur, the FPS, and overall the visual experience was the same as the Elgato. At this point, I spent days recording and comparing the footage, and I was determined to find anything, no matter how small, just a single difference. So I pulled some CSI shit and I enhanced and I zoomed. And boom, I spotted something. Yeah, it's petty and small, but it's something. I noticed that if you looked closely enough, the GAM was a lot more feathered out. Like for instance, the gun icon in Deathloop, if we looked at the HD60, you can notice that it's a tad more sharper and more clear-cut lines. But then looking at the GAM, we see that it sort of just blends. Now personally, I don't know which I would prefer. I do think the Elgato does look a tad better. Now if you guys have some input or feedback, please drop them in the comments. You'll definitely help out any future buyers, and I would appreciate it greatly. So a couple weeks have gone by and I continued abusing the shit out of my GAM. I streamed a bit, recorded some delicious footage for some god terrible edits, and it worked just as good as the moment I got it. Unfortunately, I couldn't test out the 4K 30 as I just don't have a setup that supports 4K gaming currently. Now, I'm not sponsored or affiliated with this product. I genuinely just saw it on Amazon and was curious on how well it would perform compared to the Elgato. But if you're considering it, I'd say go for it. The only reason I could see someone wanting the Elgato is because of the software and maybe the ecosystem of products they have, and the fact that we don't know how it performs long term, if there's any hardware fails like the other cheaper Chinese capture cards available. But if you guys have any questions, please comment them below. I'll try my best to get back to you. Like always, thank you guys for watching. Maybe consider subscribing, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Deuces.